if you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened.
Hey guys, retired Lieutenant Todd Heaton here with Humilitas First. What lessons might we take away from this unjust attack on former President Donald Trump? Well, aside from the numerous questions that range from incompetence to malice regarding how a 20-year-old is able to conduct reconnaissance, then wander around the venue doing suspicious things, looking suspicious, being odd, nobody calls him out. Nobody confronts him. And then climb up with a rifle, acquiring an elevated shooting platform in relative close proximity to former President Trump. How's that happen? Individually, we get a lot of dumb ideas from Hollywood. So in my Hollywood memory file, I can imagine the shooter being identified way quicker and his threat, meaning his will to do what he wants to do, being neutralized a lot faster. In terms of Hollywood standards, maybe even before he's able to get that first shot off. But that's fantasy. That's not reality. The reality-based principle, the underlying principle that I'm talking about here is action beats reaction. By how much? Well, in this case, it's nearly 6 seconds after the first shot rings out that a law enforcement sniper's gun issues a single bark, finishing the unjust aggressor's attack, ultimately finishing the unjust aggressor with a single shot to the head. At the root of action beating reaction, we find another underlying principle called initiative. Which adversary has found a way to exploit the other adversary's vulnerability and seize the initiative? When it comes to street violence, when it's too late to avoid the violent confrontation, and in your best judgment, compliance is not likely to produce a good outcome, then you need to seize the initiative. In the late Colonel John Boyd's OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act, the OODA loop is not something that a person consciously thinks about during a moment of violence. That's not where Boyd's decision-making model shines. Rather, it's going to shine as it relates to properly forming or teaching someone the winning ways, the winning principles for use of force, and also in breaking down violent game film. So how does one come to this knowledge? Well, one of the best ways that I used is listen to associates of John Boyd's like Chet Richards or Chuck Spiney. Both of these men have done a number of interviews where they share Boyd's thoughts and teachings. Additionally, Chet Richards has a website called Slightly East of New. And if you click on the articles tab, and you can choose from among most, if not all, of Boyd's actual works, his slideshows that he used for presentations with our military personnel. Robert Coram also wrote a book called Boyd, the Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War. Looking back in my notes, I'm not sure which source some of these excerpts, these quotes come from. That's why I just told you about all of them. But I'll share a few of the things that I learned about Boyd and his thoughts on initiative. Here's a quote. Even if you look like you're being passive, you're really not. The key is to keep the initiative. Think of an ambush, for example. Who has the initiative in an ambush? Even if you're sitting there and you look like you're passive, well, you've set it all up beforehand. You lured your adversary into a trap. All of that is you taking the initiative. If you see that your adversary is not falling into your trap, then you're going to immediately pull your ambush back and do something different. End quote. Most likely something unexpected. In fact, the least expected is what Boyd often recommends. This is a different way of thinking. You stop seeing yourself as prey, ever. Regardless of the circumstances, when opportunity, and that largely means timing, when opportunity presents itself, you see yourself as the winner. Concepts like shot isn't dead. Dead is dead. Keep fighting. Win the fight. Ideas like protecting your wife and your children. well, that means maybe you don't make it back. Maybe that's the cost. If your wife and children are protected, well, that's still a win. That is defined as a win, except the cost. Sometimes that's the cost. It's a different way of thinking. You're not the victim. If anything, when another predator comes at you and yours, you're a bigger predator. You're a self-sacrificing apex predator that will not quit until time gives way to eternity. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you won't quit. You're like the 5,000-pound great white coming up from the murky shadows, from the depths, incapacitating on the first hit every time. That's a different way of thinking. The idea of always keeping the initiative, it runs through all of Boyd's work. Keeping it, regaining it, how to do that. I digress. Look, those who have experience with violence as part of their profession, whether that's law enforcement, corrections, or the military, well, they understand how effective principles like surprise, speed, and violence of action, how important those principles are to actually win in a fight. In today's legal environment, you are far better off as an innocent person of goodwill using surprise, speed, and avoidance. Because in that way, the unjust aggressor, the street robber, well, he becomes somebody else's problem. He's not your problem. You've already moved on with surprise, speed, and avoidance. That is where the Secret Service, or really any executive protection team, is supposed to shine. Surprise, speed, and avoidance. The problem, the assassin, he's supposed to be deterred, detected, delayed, or denied much earlier in their approach to do their evil deed. When and if a protective detail gets down to the point of defend, it's generally considered a massive failure. Why? Because those who understand violence understand how important initiative is. Because action beats reaction. The initiative for Secret Service or executive protection, it ought to rightly be seized in the days, hours, or the minutes leading up to the assassin's ambush. The farther out away from the assassin's first shot fired, the better. Yes, in this case, counter snipers ended this unjust attack with just one bullet. Well, not these two particular counter snipers, but another counter sniper. But just imagine if the assassin had been a more capable marksman and had former President Donald Trump not decided at about 1.75 seconds after the first shot was fired to make himself a much smaller target. Then this whole thing ends very badly. You may be wondering how you learning some basic fundamental principles of executive protection might help you, the average Joe. Well, if you have a wife and children, then you already have some very important people in your life that you'd like to protect and keep safe. The principles that work for avoiding violent confrontations, they don't change. Now, if you put lazy, incompetent, or even in some extreme cases, malicious people in charge, well, those principles, they might not be applied. But the principles themselves, they don't change. In a world that's becoming increasingly violent and lawless, it pays to be a winner and to learn the underlying fundamental winning principles. That's how you become a winner. The best book that I've ever read regarding using surprise, speed, and avoidance, although he doesn't frame it in those exact terms, it's from a specialist who honed his skills in his executive protection practice south of the border in Mexico. His name is Ivan Ivanovich. The book is called Executive Protection in the 21st Century, A New Vision, published in 2023. Now, I'm not an affiliate, so I have no financial interest or gain in sharing that with you. But I very highly recommend this book as it begins to unpack the underlying fundamental winning principles of executive protection. Another great resource is his blog at ivanivanovich.com, as Mr. Ivanovich comments on current stories, including this attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump.